This block only exists in Pocket Edition. And did you know that dirt slabs used to be in the game? And these are 47 Minecraft block facts that you possibly didn't know. This block only exists in Pocket Edition, or at least it used to. Because nowadays this block looks a whole lot different, and it's the stone cutter they're all used to. But sure enough, when it was first added into Pocket Edition, it did used to be a full block in size, looking a lot closer to a furnace than anything that we're used to today. And while the old texture was boring, it looks a lot easier to stand on, so it might have been nice to have a safer option. If by some way you were to get water inside of the Nether dimension in Bedrock Edition, then because of the way the biomes are coded, the water will actually turn red in color. Which is weird that they would have such a difference between Bedrock and Java in this way, but since it's not an intentional feature to have water in the Nether anyway, I'm really just amazed that they went through the effort of changing the color in the first place.
With 3 TNT in a row, you can craft the Ethos Slab. This joke item, unsurprisingly named after Minecraft YouTuber Ethos Lab, was a part of the April Fool's update Minecraft 2.0, and while it behaved almost exactly like a regular TNT block, you can never be too careful around Etho.
Pop quiz, what block is shorter than a slab? Actually, it's a cauldron, because clearly the block itself when you place them side by side doesn't look that much smaller, but rather when you stand inside of a cauldron, then you'll be standing at half the height of someone who's standing on top of a slab. Minecraft doesn't have dominoes, but it does have hanging signs, and what we're able to do with those is have a hanging sign supporting underneath another hanging sign. So if you take that to its logical extreme, you can have a whole chain of these things only going from one hanging sign support. So all it's gonna take is breaking one of those, and that whole domino chain falls apart.
This is the shortest block in Minecraft, though from this point of view it might be hard to see that it's even there. But if we move over here, you'll notice that the lily pad is only 1% the size of a normal block. And on the other end, the tallest block you can place would be the door, standing at 2 blocks tall, exactly.
If you were to take the time to set up all the prismarine blocks to fully power up a conduit, then you'd notice that the conduit block inside actually gives off the same light level as glowstone. But really, if you're going through all that effort to try and light up your local lake, why wouldn't you just use that prismarine to make a sea lantern? Or better yet, use the actual glowstone that you would need to make the sea lanterns and just use that because obviously glowstone's as bright as glowstone. Or the real cheapest option, 4 sea pickles gives off the exact same amount of light, a level of 15. This furnace only exists in Bedrock Edition, since in the past, if you had a silk touch pick and you managed to break a furnace while it was smelting, you'd be left with a unique item called the lit furnace. Though make no mistake, this is definitely not intentional, considering when you hovered over the item in your inventory, the name had an underscore like it would show up in the game's files, and that's likely why this got patched out in the first place. If you're playing on a Minecraft server, pay attention to the cactus blocks, because if you were to walk into a desert and notice that most of the cacti nearby are 1 block tall in size, then that means that you likely encountered new land, because otherwise if someone had been there, they would have loaded the chunks and the cacti would have grown a little bit, which is a handy way to know if you're discovering new land or just retreading into someone's rejects.
Unlike grass, if you place a block on top of podzol, it will never decay into a dirt block, no matter how long you wait, unlike its mycelium or grass counterparts. But you can get plenty of this with a 2x2 spruce tree, so I'm not all that worried about missing out on a podzol supply.
If you don't have the extra materials to make a sign or an item frame, then it is possible to name your chest in this way, since any container item will retain their name in the UI screen if you were to name them in an anvil. And considering that you can name a whole stack of these at once, it could be pretty cheap overall. At the very least, it's just an easy way to sneak in a funny message for your friend and wonder if they'll ever notice it.
In the snapshots for 1.20, it's possible to duplicate any book as many times as you want. After you've filled up the new chiseled bookshelf block, simply click it again with whatever book you please. So if you were to use an auto clicker here, you'd be able to get some pretty ridiculous results.
If you didn't already think that the Skulk Shrieker was a creepy block, then maybe this will convince you. Because as it turns out, the block was originally designed after inspiration from the human larynx, that being the part of the throat that actually makes the noises when you shriek. Which makes sense when you think about it, but it's also pretty creepy to think of your blocks turning into some kind of living mass. I don't know, it weirds me out.
Rails behave in an odd way, but you'll have to listen closely to notice it, since when you run over rails placed on the ground, it will play the sound effects of the block under the rail. But if you only walk or jump on top of the rails, then you'll hear the sound of iron.
This was once one of the rarest blocks in Minecraft, at least one of the rarest to find, because prior to version 1.8, chiseled bricks didn't have any kind of crafting recipe. So the only way that you'd find one of these outside of a creative mode menu would have been inside of a jungle temple, which alone is rare, and they exist within jungle biomes, which also happen to be rare. So you're gonna have to go through quite the journey just to build with one of these in your world, and thankfully now they have a crafting recipe. But tracking down the chiseled stone bricks isn't their only annoyance, since due to the fact that Minecraft textures are 16 by 16, this pattern was bound to have some asymmetry, and that would be why the center of this block isn't actually in the center. And this is one of those where I'm afraid once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. And unfortunately, a cobblestone wall like this doesn't make it any easier to look at. Much like the chiseled bricks, dried kelp also isn't symmetrical. And unfortunately, the rope that's tied around the dried kelp block is offset by 1 pixel, which gets really noticeable as soon as you lean in and pay attention to it. Which is too bad, but I also don't figure that dried kelp's the most popular block out there, so you're probably not going to notice this on a day-to-day basis.
When lava spreads, it can trigger a tripwire hook, which allows for some pretty creative traps if you're devious enough. But keep in mind this is just a one-time deal, since that lava will break the string and tripwire hooks in the process. So if you're going to use it, make sure it kills them on the first go.
Why does this difference exist? Because as you'll notice, if you place a note block on top of an oak door, it'll change the sound that the note block plays. But place it on top of an iron door, no change. At the very least, you would expect it to play the same kind of instrument as the block of iron does, being the iron xylophone. And that would have been better anyway, because an iron door is a lot cheaper than an iron block, especially when you get 3 of them. Water in the nether's clearly unintentional, but for a time, you could get it legit. For a brief moment during the snapshot 21W03A, if you placed a glow-lichen plant into the same space as a lava source block, that lava would turn into water. And this is because of faulty code where they were trying to make it so glow-lichen could be waterlogged, but never accounted for it being lava-logged. But as soon as this glitch was discovered, it was quickly patched out and never made it into a full release.
This item breaks blocks faster than an Efficiency 5 Haste 2 shovel. You truly can't beat a torch when it comes to breaking gravity blocks. As you can plainly see from this comparison, even with a head start, the shovel still loses out to the torch, making this undoubtedly the better option, and not to mention that it's substantially cheaper.
This texture tweak was small, but it made a big difference, because when Mojang first added in observers, their arrows used to point the other direction, which is definitely confusing to see when you look back at it nowadays, but it must have been confusing at the time, since shortly after they would flip around the arrow texture so that it now matches what it is today. Never craft this block, because while it might seem handy to compress your 9 netherwart down to 1 netherwart block, unlike other compressed material blocks, this can't be crafted back into its base material. And considering the fact that you're able to get these blocks from the crimson trees, I'd say it's better to save your netherwart for your potion farm. There's already going to be plenty enough supply of these the other way around.
Don't smelt your ancient debris, but rather you should save it for your redstone machines. Ancient debris has the same blast resistance as obsidian, but unlike obsidian, we can move our ancient debris with a piston, which makes machines like this not only possible, but also highly effective. Plus, if you consider the upside to having a tunnel bore, it's worth missing out on some netherite scraps.
Did you know the secret using trapdoors and lecterns? Because with the way that the blocks render, if you place a trapdoor on top of a lectern block like this, and then add a book to that lectern, the pages will glitch through the top of the trapdoor and make it look as if you have an arrow that's pointing the players in the right direction, which is definitely a neat discovery, and it's a cool way of adding a subtle hint to your friends next time that they get lost on your server. For some reason, Belle blocks are taller in Java Edition than they are in Bedrock, and while that's the case, I honestly have no clue. But what I do know is that if you ring the bell underneath this video, it'd be much appreciated.
If you're trying to hide from your foes, consider crafting a chest or a sign. Since these are rendered differently from typical blocks, if you stand behind one, your name tag doesn't render as usual. This gives you a way to hide from the competition without holding down the sneak key, which is better for secrecy and for your fingers, honestly.
If you were to place a water source block next to a non-full block like mud, soul sand, or the like, and then walk forward into a wall, you'll notice that because the block isn't a full 16 pixels in size, we'll just start to bounce up and down indefinitely because of the water. And this is also the reason why you never want to bridge out of soul sand when you're going through a lava lake, because it's too low, you're gonna catch on fire.
If you place a note block on top of a slab, that slab will change the sound of the note block even if it doesn't visually look like they're touching, which makes more sense if the slab is placed on the top half, but for a bottom slab like this, it just feels off.
If you're playing around with the 1.20 snapshots, you've likely been disappointed by this, because even though we can now craft bamboo into fence blocks like this, unfortunately those fences are always going to be thicker than the bamboo stem itself. But then again, this is only noticeable if you're able to get it to line up, because bamboo is randomly offset when you place it as well. So really, what seems like it would be a great combo is anything but that. So if you want it to line up, you're just gonna have to break the bamboo stalk and craft it into whatever you're building out of.
Put away your axe, you won't need it for this, since this isn't your average oak wood slab, but instead this is a secret item called a petrified oak slab, and it only exists in old legacy worlds or by using commands to spawn it in. And the difference is that for these, you don't harvest them with an axe, but rather you use a pickaxe.
If you don't have a compass, try looking out for some pumpkins. Crazy as that might sound, the pumpkin stem is always rendered in such a way where it's facing towards the northwest direction. And there you go. Even if you don't have a North Star, you've essentially got a North Squash. So if you know what direction your base is, this will at least help you get back on track. Which is all particularly helpful if you don't have something like the debug screen if you're playing on Bedrock. If you were to line up the textures of Bedrock blocks just right, you'll notice a hidden detail that starts to poke out of the blend, and it becomes instantly more noticeable when we highlight it like this. Sure enough, there's a wither skull that pokes through the texture, which, intentional or not, is a fun detail. Here's why ender rods are useful when they're horizontal, but not as much when they're vertical. Because when it's horizontal, you're able to drop falling blocks on top of it and it'll break them like so. Much the same way that a torch or slab would, but place it upright instead, and the falling blocks can fall right into place without ever breaking.
Soul Sand is creepy, but this is even creepier, since if you were to take the time to break a player head block, you can look closely and notice that the particle effects from breaking it are the same as the Soul Sand particles. I guess it's called Soul Sand for a reason. It's filled with the same stuff as Steve's skull.
If you were to line the bottom of a nearby riverbed using mud blocks, then that row of mud will cancel out the swimming animation, allowing you to just run like normal underneath the water. And this is due to the fact that mud actually renders you 1 pixel lower inside of the block, so you're not really running in water, you're running in mud.
This beacon wasn't supposed to exist, but because of a glitch in 1.7.4, there was a way to get a black beacon before Glass could even change the beacon color. If you place 4 black wool around a beacon and then use a redstone clock and pistons to push the blocks over the top, there you have it, a black beacon before you were even supposed to have one.
Instead of draining an ocean monument using sand, why not use pistons? Since the fact of the matter is, a powered piston is able to destroy water source blocks, which means that if you have the slime on hand to make this kind of water-moving robot shown off by RVR, you can drain out entire oceans without ever touching sponge, sand, or any of that other stuff. And personally, I'll never complain about having an automatic option.
Fire beats ice, but not in Minecraft. And you'll see as much when you try to use a flint and steel, since trying to ignite an ice block here won't result in any fire to see. But what's even more embarrassing is that this failed attempt will still waste the durability of the flint and steel.
Even though the only way to craft a lodestone is to use a netherite ingot, unfortunately this expensive block isn't immune to fire or lava the same way that netherite is. It's not even like just the stone burns off and you get the netherite ingot back. The whole thing disappears, which could be quite the tragedy if you were to drop one of these in the nether.
If you were to ignite a piece of TNT mid-air and let it fall, how far could it fall before exploding? After running this test, you can see that it takes 72 blocks before the TNT explodes. So take this as a lesson before you build your next flying machine. If you go too high, your bombs won't be able to reach your friend's base below.
Unlike every other block that you'll break with a shovel, snow blocks are the only one that specifically requires shovel to be broken successfully, since the rest you could either do by hand or use something like Silk Touch. But snow blocks, no luck, it's shovel or nothing.
Because of the way hitboxes work, if you place an armor stand on top of a block and then drop it onto a fence post, it'll just float in place, which gives us a pretty weird result. This is especially strange when you consider that armor stands don't float on slabs, snow layers, or even enchanting tables.
Because lily pads are rendered so thin, if you were to run on top of a row of these, you'll notice that the particles that you give off from your feet are actually the water particles instead of the lily pads, which I actually think makes sense. It's like your feet are splashing up water instead of splashing up parts of the lily pad.
This is glow lichen, and this is a block of glow lichen. Or it sure looks that way, but what's actually happening here is that by placing a piece of glow lichen on the ground and then rotating it with a debug stick, you'll have what appears to be a block of the lichen. What's most interesting about all this is that even with all this glow lichen, it no longer glows, which seems odd.
When chests were first added to Minecraft, they used to be a full block in size, which is different to the 14 pixel chest entities that we're familiar with today. And because they were a full block in size, you were able to place things like torches and redstone over the top of them, which is unfortunately something we lost now. But this old chest would have looked ridiculous if it was waterlogged, so maybe it's for the best that we got the newer option. Before any other slab was added to Minecraft, the first of the bunch was actually a dirt slab. But even though it was the first, it never made it past any of the older versions, which is definitely a shame for builders, but with a texture like this, it might have been too distracting to build with anyway. And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?